It's a pleasure. After all these years, after 2011.
There you are.
Yeah, hi. Okay.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. Great. And since the 6th of April to today, the cases in India have risen dramatically. And as they say, we are in the second wave here. We have stepped up on the vaccination. Have you got your first dose, though? You were mentioning you haven't as yet.
No, but I'm getting it Thursday.
All right. Okay. All the best. Here, many of us have got our first doses, and and the second one is sometime in the month of May for many of us. Hopefully, all of us would see this through. We would all be safe. And in the last year, when things were under lockdown, and the Alumni Association of our department and faculty members, we all thought that we must keep the ideas flowing. We must meet people online, and we all learned how to, first of all.
Yes.
And I mean, our students are very good at it, but we are not so much. But we learned from them. And then we began what is called Professor Avdesh Kumar Singh Memorial Lecture Series in memory of the founder of our department. That is the first time when I wrote a mail to you. I had only the Louisville mail with me. I knew that you were no longer with Louisville. I just hoped that the mail would reach through to you. And although late, it did. We had 10 talks by various scholars all over India, and one from France, a very reputed radio journalist and riverine ecologist by the name of Julian Crandall Hollick. He was very kind enough to talk to all of us. He has done some very good work on the river Ganga, Ganges as it is. In T.S. Eliot, it is Ganga. Ganga was sunken. And okay, so this is the river, often the lifeline of North India. And Julian Crandall Hollick did some very good work on that, ecological work on that. And there were others. And after the series of 10 lectures, we took a break because there were these online exams coming up. And then again, I was very happy to receive your mail, and your mail was so very direct, talking about what you would like to talk on. And therefore, we have again revived what we now call the expert lecture series, and you are first on that. So on behalf of the department, on behalf of all the alumni of the department, I very warmly welcome you, Professor Thomas Byers. And we have circulated the poster. The brief talks about you. My acquaintance, dear participants, with Professor Byers goes back to 2011, when I was fortunate enough to be part of the summer school at the University of Louisville. And he was the director of the school, and he was, since many years, the director of the Study of United States Institution, SUSI program. And what struck me on the very first day that I met him was that, which was a little surprising for me, that the director of a program himself comes to receive the participant. Actually, there was Professor Byers with a small placard with my name at the Louisville airport. My flight, I remember, was delayed and rerouted. And so he must have been put to quite a bit of a delay and trouble, and yet he was there. This was one thing that at the very beginning, the warmth, the welcome that immediately struck me. And of course, you will see that he is a specialist in American literature, communication, media studies, culture. Something that's again struck me was while talking about canonical literature, how well he connected with popular culture. So while we were talking about, say, the beat poets, Professor Byers would show that he is wearing a tie with the beat poets' faces on, and that was something again very unique that struck me. Or when we were touring the San Francisco Bay Area and the rainbow houses, and how he connected that with the gay and the lesbian movement that supported that the area supported. Or when we were talking about a Chinese American writer, Brian Leong. I think you are in touch with Brian Leong, Professor Byers? Yeah.
Yes.
Professor Byers organized a dinner with Chinese cuisine. So that was how things, literature and life, they were so well integrated and connected. So this is, I would not take much of your time, and this is how I have very, very fond memories of Professor Byers and Louisville, University of Louisville, and the 6 weeks that I could spend there. And all of you know today he would be speaking on a very specific story, and then he would open up to larger areas on that. So Charles Yu. And without much ado then, I would humbly invite Professor Byers for his talk. So.
Thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee. I have a few words to say in preface. The first is that I have been reading about the situation in your country, and I am very sorry to see that you are undergoing a fierce second wave of the pandemic. And I want to say to all of you that I wish you and your loved ones good health. Help is coming. The vaccines are very effective. I personally cannot wait to be vaccinated and feel more secure and feel free to leave the house and so forth. But we must hold on and be safe until this happens. And I wish you and your loved ones all the best. The second thing I must say is that I owe a sincere and profound apology to Professor Mukherjee and to all of you who tuned in on the earlier date. I got confused about the day of the month, and I am very sorry that I inconvenienced and caused that difficulty. At my age, one does not have as many opportunities to do things that one is ashamed of as one does when one is younger. But I was ashamed to have missed that, and I do apologize. I'm going also to make a request, and it may or may not be possible or work out. If some of you could turn on your cameras, if you don't mind, if it is not an imposition, I would like to see a few faces as I speak. Thank you, there's one. Because it's easier to try to connect with people if you can see some faces. Thank you. And don't feel any obligation, but I do appreciate it.
There is Maria, Professor Byers from Slovakia. Hello.
Oh, yes. Hi. How are you?
Hi, Tom. It's great to see you. It's wonderful.
Well, it's great to see you as well. I wasn't registering, but now yes. Oh, that's
wonderful,
great.
Wonderful. My senior colleague from the department, Professor Mehta, has also joined, Kamal Mehta.
Very pleased to meet you, sir.
He has worked on the short story form.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I am retired now as I get older. In the last few years of my career, I had the problem, especially when I was teaching undergraduate classes that I had taught many times before, and especially if I was teaching right after lunch, which is the time here now, I had the problem that occasionally I would fall asleep while lecturing. And my students hated this when I did this because my snoring would wake them. So I will try to stay awake. I'm going to plunge in and to talk about this this very interesting and hitherto not much written about writer Charles Yu. So I'm going to, without further, well, let me also say that I'm deeply honored to be part of your lecture series. It is a great pleasure. So here we go. As of today, Charles Yu has published 2 short story collections, Third Class Superhero and Sorry, Please, Thank You. I can't show you Third Class Superhero because I only have it on Kindle, because by the time I found out about him, it was already out of print. I think it will be coming back now that he's won the National Book Award. But this is Sorry, Please, Thank You. And this is the book in which the story Standard Loneliness Package appears. He has also published 2 novels, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, and most recently, Interior Chinatown. All of these books have attracted acclaim. Most notably, the distinguished novelist Richard Powers selected Yu for the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 prize. This was 5 writers under the age of 35 for Third Class Superhero. And then last year, Interior Chinatown won the National Book Award for Fiction, one of the 3 most important annual awards in the US for a book of literary fiction. The other 2 are the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award. Yu is difficult to classify as a writer, not because his work is unclassifiably unique, but rather because it partakes of and yet does not completely fit into so many different categories, among them social satire, Asian American literature, science fiction, experimental fiction, and metafiction. 2 of his most prominent subjects are, first, parent-child relations, especially from the point of view of an adult son who is looking at his parents' lives. And also, second, the hardships of contemporary working life. Yu frequently explores characters' self-awareness outside of or on the edge of a model or a goal, such as Americanness or success or loving connection or simply having a decent life. His characters tend to stand on the edge of this or just outside it, but very aware of such goals. Recently, he has profoundly analyzed the difficulties of Asian American identity. At the same time, his work is noted, his work is noted for pleasurable imaginative conceits, metafictional virtuosity, and humor. As the critic Leslie Bow notes, Yu is a master at externalizing the arbitrary or inane simulacra that govern contemporary bourgeois existence. Yet at the heart of Yu's fiction lies an affective and relatable core. This combination of social satire and sharp humor with a kind of emotional core, I think, is something very characteristic of this writer. Born in Los Angeles in 1976, Charles Yu is the son of immigrants from Taiwan. He graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, probably the best public university in the United States, where he majored, interestingly enough, in biology, but, quote, and I'm quoting him here, minored in creative writing, in poetry, taking several poetry workshops with people like Tom Gunn and Ishmael Reed. Tom Gunn, the very prominent British poet, and Ishmael Reed, the African-American novelist, best known for his fiction. You aspired to become a medical doctor, or at least, I'm not sure about this. I think his parents really aspired for that more than he did. But by his own account, he failed. He says that he, quote, did not get into medical school, unquote. What he did instead was to go to Columbia Law School, one of the very best law schools in the US, and afterwards he worked as a corporate lawyer, during which time he started seriously writing fiction at night after work. Eventually, however, he got a call from HBO and he became a television writer, first on Westworld, for which he received 2 Writers Guild of America award nominations in 1917, and then on a number of other shows. I don't know if Westworld has made it to India. Has anybody seen it? Maybe.
No, I haven't. I'm not aware of it.
Well, it's an interesting science fiction series about a futuristic theme park in I see that it has made it to India.
Oh, great.
It's a
Westworld.
theme park in which you can go and be a Western hero or a Western villain. And you can kill these automatons and have shoot 'em ups and do all kinds of wild behaviors. It's a very interesting series, and the great Anthony Hopkins is in the first season. And you did work on it as a writer. And since then, he's worked on a number of other shows, none of which is as famous as Westworld. I'm going to now try briefly to place you in the context of contemporary American fiction. I realize that some of the names here may be unfamiliar to you, but they're all important figures, and I suspect you would enjoy them. And in any case, this only takes up 1 paragraph of my paper. So, writers whom you claims as influences include the great master of science fiction, Isaac Asimov, and major postmodern literary writers, Philip Roth, Donald Barthelme, Don DeLillo, and George Saunders. You is often compared to George Saunders, who is another very, very interesting contemporary writer. You has expressed admiration for cyberpunk icon William Gibson, whom you places right at the center of the intersection of science fiction and literary fiction. And he has expressed admiration also for other literary novelists, such as Jonathan Lethem, Richard Powers, and Ben Lerner. Critics have compared Charles Yu to Italo Calvino, Kurt Vonnegut, Junot Diaz, and Ted Chiang. Now, notably absent from these partial lists are women, no women mentioned here, and other than Chiang, no Asian American writers. Almost all of the people that he has said publicly that he admires or was influenced by are white male writers. And I'll come back to that briefly in a little bit. The absence of women points unhappily to a continuing tendency on the scene of US fiction to compartmentalize writing by gender. As to race and ethnicity, while the few scholars who have discussed Yu to date tend to place him in an Asian American context, journalistic writing and his own statements in interviews have up to now linked him almost entirely with the white authors. This is likely to change, however, as people begin to write about interior Chinatown, because it is very clearly about Asian American identity and the Asian American situation in the US. One comparison that would be worth exploring, and if anybody out there is looking for a dissertation topic, this would be a great one, would be to compare you to the very brilliant Japanese American writer Karen Tei Yamashita, whose The I Hotel, like Interior Chinatown, combines formal and generic play, Asian American history, and moving stories of individual characters. I strongly recommend Yamashita to you. While The I Hotel is her magnum opus to date, her big, fat, dissertation-worthy book, a good place to start might be with the shorter but wonderfully pleasurable Tropic of Orange, a magic realist novel about contemporary Los Angeles. Now, what I most want to do in the rest of my time today is to introduce you all too briefly to each of you's 4 books, in the hopes of whetting your appetite for reading him and of encouraging us to think about some of the important social issues raised by his work. But I feel I must start with some reflections on reading, on my reading, and on my selection of texts to discuss with you. This only covers 2 little bit long paragraphs, so we're going to get to the books themselves in just a minute. But let me indulge me for a couple of paragraphs here. To my mind, Charles Yu has 2 major modes, one more narrative and satirical, and the other more abstract and philosophical. Like the mother in Charles Yu's story Realism, who at one point tells her writer son, "Enough of your abstractions," I myself much prefer the more narrative mode. This is not, however, to claim that this is superior to the more abstract and philosophical mode. Indeed, many of Yu's best placements of his stories in magazines are for the more abstract and experimental stories. What I do see in my preference is evidence of how, as I read fiction, fiction reads me, how it assesses me, and how it tells me who I am as a reader. I got into this business of being an English professor in the first place because I love stories, imagined worlds and characters and actions and narrative arcs. And that love has persisted even to this late hour when I can see my dotage looming on the horizon. The general point here, and I think it's perhaps the most important single point I will make today, is to watch what literature tells you about yourself. The more specific one is that I'm only going to discuss 2 of the short stories in any detail, and both that I have chosen are from the more narrative or satiric mode. But that choice is based on my personal disposition as a reader, and perhaps on my narcissistic assumption that what most appeals to me will most appeal to you. I have chosen to follow my narrative affections here rather than to be more objectively representative. I want to pursue this point a little bit further in a different direction. This is the second paragraph of this part of the paper. I don't think that my opposing my preference for narrative over abstraction on this occasion is particularly problematic. I hope it isn't, at least. But such personal impositions do become deeply problematic in other instances. Here I am drawn back to the fact that when you and others discuss his influences and preferences, the writers mentioned are overwhelmingly men. This doesn't really surprise me. I suspect that generally men prefer books by men and women books by women. Clearly, two of the most important writers of U.S. fiction in the last half century are Toni Morrison, who is a woman of color, and Don DeLillo, who is a white man. If you held a gun to my head, which I hope you won't, though that's far more likely in my country than in yours, I would say that Morrison is in the end probably the greater writer. However, I take more pleasure in reading DeLillo, and I suspect that this has to do somewhat with my conscious or unconscious identifications with the writer, the white male, who is closer to my own subject position. There's probably nothing wrong with that. You know, we are who we are. And when we talk about our pleasure, you know, we're allowed to indulge ourselves a bit. However, I feel deeply that as literary critics, and especially as teachers, we have a broader responsibility. We must strive to represent fairly the range of quality writing, and we must strive to understand and appreciate that which is farther from our own subject position and our own point of view. In my personal reading, I nearly always have at least two books going at once. One in regular book form like these, and the other on my Kindle so that I can read late at night without disturbing my wife, since I fall asleep much, much later than she does. As a rule of thumb, I try generally to make sure that at least one of these books is by a woman. This as a way both of combating the male domination of the institutions of literary prestige and a way of broadening my own understanding and, I hope, my empathy. As for students, I generally used to tell my undergraduates that sometime in their reading lives, all the boys had to read Jane Eyre and all the girls had to read Moby Dick, and that was that. Just had to do it. Further, I try to make sure that as one who comes from a racist culture of still inadequately recognized white privilege, I read new books by people of color on a regular basis. These books inform me in tremendously important ways. In this light, by the way, I am especially glad to have read Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown for the insights and the sheer facts that it gave me about anti-Asian racism in the US, a phenomenon that is generally only semi-visible in my white-dominated personal experience. Although, sadly, it has been disturbingly prominent in the news in the US lately. Well, thank you for your patience with these reflections. I leave it to you to apply them, if it is possible, to your own obviously very different context. I turn now at last to Charles Yu's fiction. The title story of Yu's first collection, Third Class Superhero, takes as its premise that being a superhero is an employment category, in short, a job. The story is narrated by a man who has graduated from superhero school, but whose application for official superhero status keeps failing year after year as he sees his more talented classmates surpassing him. The humorous center of his problem is his quite limited superpower. So this is from the story. It's narrated by this figure. He says, "My power, if you can call it that, and I don't think you can, is that I am able to take about 2 gallons of water from the moisture in the air and shoot it in a stream or a gentle mist or a ball, which is useful for water balloon fights, but not all that helpful when trying to stop carnage and mayhem two supervillains in his world from robbing a bank. So he's a superhero, but all he can do is produce this sort of spray of, a couple of liters of water, right? This guy's superhero name is the less than overwhelming Moisture Man. Not Spider-Man, but Moisture Man. This guy reads self-help books and he studies physics and history and theory to try to better himself, but he still cannot, quote, change the fact that I'm minor, not even minor, a sideshow, a human water fountain. Eventually, he wonders despairingly, quote, even if the rest of my life is one long lucky streak until the day I die, where does that get me? Middle management? A teaching post? Adjunct lecturer? So in desperation, because he wants to obtain on the black market the ability to fly, he sells a group of his colleagues, his stronger, more powerful colleagues, into an ambush where one of them is killed. Thus, he betrays his status as a literally card-carrying good guy. He isn't a full superhero yet. He hasn't been admitted to full status as a superhero, but he's a card-carrying good guy. You can have a good guy card or a bad guy card. But now he's going to lose his good guy card, presumably. In the end, he flies for the first time. But as he does so, he assesses himself and his situation thus. He says, I'm not a superhero. I'm background. I'm a good person wrapped in a mediocre soul. I want to be better. I really do. But even now, in my greatest moment, I know this is as good as it will ever get for me. And it's not that good. The superhero framework of this story provides humor and entertainment, but the story addresses a serious situation, the condition of the white-collar working class. For his day job, the narrator of this story works as a records clerk for a big midtown law firm. Our hero aspires to a position that only the most highly qualified and talented will ever get. Indeed, that's the allegorical meaning of superhero here. The superheroes are the ones who really have the talent to become stars, right, in their chosen field. But this guy has already lowered his expectations dramatically. It's not, he says, it's not like I'm asking for a lot. I don't need to be an all-star. I just want a suit and a cape, steady work, a paycheck that covers groceries, decent health insurance, but I'll have to wait another year. But even this kind of basic success is beyond the reach even of many who have graduated from the specialized training of superhero school. Those few with superhuman gifts flourish in the spotlight. For everyone else, even if they work hard and follow the rules, the economy of inequity offers only long struggle for minor success. And I have to say, what this really reminds me of is the academic job market in the US, where jobs, tenurable jobs, have gotten so rare that only the sort of superstars get them. And I have a former undergraduate student who has published his first book with Stanford, and he still doesn't have a tenurable job. This is, a very frightening situation in some ways. And, tenurable jobs are important because they're the jobs with benefits. They're the jobs with health care. They're the jobs with some retirement money. They're the jobs with a decent future and a secure future. They're rarer and rarer, and you have to be more and more superhumanly talented to get them. Well, the narrator lays his limitations to not having been, quote, born gifted, unquote, a deficiency that he can't overcome even through special effort. I wish that this story showed more awareness that in reality, the so-called gifts separating the elite from everyone else are often matters of privilege more than talent. You know, a lot of the people who get ahead in academia get ahead because they were raised by parents who had graduate degrees and who had good jobs and so forth. For that matter, though, we should also recognize that talent is an accident of birth, and thus it's a privilege. It's not a result of hard work, nor is it a sign of moral superiority. Now, there are people who get ahead through hard work. I don't mean to say that, but every academic I know works hard. Well, most academics I know work hard. We tend to take for granted that there is something better about talent, and we probably ought to think about it a little bit more as luckier. You know, not that it doesn't matter, but that it's not a sign of moral superiority. But what this story does do through a comedic situation, but through a convincing and poignant narrative voice, is to convey how it feels to realize that one is doomed to a life of professional, financial, and even personal mediocrity. Okay, I'm going to move to a new work now, the work of views that most partakes of or plays with science fiction, with the science fiction genre with which he has often been identified, is How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe. Its protagonist narrator, whose name not incidentally is Charles Yu, but he's a fictional character. Usually when people write about this book, they refer to the fictional character as Charles and the author as Yu, just to make a distinction. But what he does is, quote, he fixes time machines for a living. Otherwise, he generally spends his time alone in his TM31 time machine, a piece of, as he describes it, quote, chronodiegetical technology, a 6-cylinder grammar drive built on a quad-core physics engine, allowing for free-form navigation within a rendered environment, such as, for instance, a story space, and in particular, a science fictional universe. Now, what we get here is a sign already that the time machine here is a kind of allegorical figure for something that is textual, for a story, something that has to do with a story world. And I'll pick up on this as we go on. But you know, it has a 6-cylinder grammar drive. Have you ever heard of a means of transportation that has a grammar drive? I mean, obviously it has something to do with language, right? The combination of physics with grammar here reminds me of the Nefastus machine in Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49, which involves the blending of the concept of entropy in physics with the concept of entropy in communications theory. A blending that Pynchon makes very great metaphorical use of in that particular novel. In Yu's text, quote, memory and regret are the set of necessary and sufficient elements required to produce a time machine. You can make a time machine out of memory and regret. Well, it doesn't exactly sound like hardware, but ultimately, the reader realizes that the machine may actually be consciousness or writing itself. Indeed, Yu has been quoted as saying of the novel itself, "I was hoping it would be characterized as a time machine, although I realize there is no section for time machines in most bookstores." I find the novel ambiguous as to whether time travel is ever to be taken as a material phenomenon or whether it is always and only a metaphor for mental and textual processes. Although there are parts of the novel where it feels like it's a literal phenomenon. Early in the book, the narrator keeps to himself. Having never recovered from the trauma of his father's abandonment of the family, he has rejected chronological time, choosing instead to live in what he calls the present indefinite tense. He uses his time machine to stay in this sort of non-chronological space-time. And he does this so as, quote, to suppress memory, to ignore the future. In, quote, a hidden cul-de-sac of space-time, the most uneventful piece of time I could find. That's why I chose it. I know for a fact that nothing bad can happen to me in here. Having had this trauma of his childhood, of his father's leaving, he has chosen as an adult to live in the least eventful, least dangerous space he can find. He has chosen, he says, a life without danger, a life without the risk of now. Charles, the narrator, suggests at least two reasons beyond his own self-protective instincts that one might choose not to live in chronological time. One concerns looking forward, the other looking back. His father lived toward the future, reading books about actualization, realization, self as a DIY, a do-it-yourself project, self as a kind of problem to be solved. This is living the present, looking forward, right? Trying to make a future that is different and better. He, quote, spent all the time he had with us thinking about how he wished he had more time, unquote. And he did that rather than living with his family in the time he had. Here, both the myth of progress and the hyperconsciousness of chronological limitation of how your time is limited, the hyperconsciousness maybe of death, become ways of not living a present life, not ways of being in the present. Moreover, once the progress myth failed the father, he has this crucial moment where he gets to show his boss the time machine that he has made. And it's like the first time machine. And it's very rudimentary, but he gets his boss to come and look at it and listen to his presentation, and it fails. And it's sort of as a consequence of that the father later leaves the family. So once the progress myth failed the father, Charles says, quote, his time machine broke down and he got trapped in the past, permanently stuck in his own history, locked into his failure. These two traps of future and past are very common and can indeed be simultaneously. Most people I know, says the narrator, live their lives moving in a constant forward direction the whole time looking backward. In this, they repeat Walter Benjamin's famous angel of history, his figure of the angel of history, who is a metaphor for life in history, who Benjamin says would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole that which has been smashed, but who cannot do so, both because he is borne forward by progress and because he can only look back on the past as catastrophe and wreckage. You want to intervene in the present, but you can't because you're moving inexorably into the future, looking back inexorably at the failures of the past. Use narrator, and this is the part where it really feels the most like a science fiction novel. He gets caught in a time loop because he ends up in the same space as his future self. And usually what sci-fi sort of works out is that if that happens, you get caught in a time loop and you just keep repeating a piece of your history that until the time that you meet, and that sort of screws up everything, and then you start over. And in Yu's time loop, or in Charles's time loop, I should say, his future self shoots his past self over and over. Finally, however, he meets another version of himself from a parallel universe who gives him a comic but existential slap in the face, telling him, only you know what to do. And I'm quoting the text, of course. Only you know what you need to do. Now get back to your life and quit being such a whiny little wuss. Be a man. Find your father. Tell him you love him, then let him go. Then go and marry that girl you never married. Anything is possible in this kind of world, you idiot. Go marry Marie and have a life and grow a heart and a pair. A pair referring, of course, to testicles. At this point, the narrator begins to come out of his, quote, present indefinite shell and use his time machine to confront the past. He reviews in particular the painful day his father tried to demonstrate his time machine invention to his company's CEO, and the machine failed. This was the day that Charles, the narrator, learned the bitter lessons of classism and immigrant status and imposter syndrome. And this is the point in the novel where it is perhaps most focused on and acute in social commentary as well as emotional impact. On this day, Charles also learned how he had let his father down by lacking confidence in him and, quote, realized how good a man my father was and is, unquote. Ultimately, having faced all this, the narrator realizes that he must step out of the box, leave the time machine caught in the loop, and enter the world of time and risk and loss again. Move forward into the empty plane. Enjoy the elastic present. There is no living safely, he realizes, that is fully living. I've got a problem. I'm halfway through and we're almost an hour in. I don't know if you want me to try to cut part of the paper or if you want to cut down on the time we had allowed for discussion.
Professor Byers, you take your time.
Okay.
You please complete your paper.
Okay. Well, sorry, I didn't realize it was going to take this much time. I also spent a lot of the time apologizing, so we got started a little late. But here, okay, at this point, I'm going to move on to Standard Loneliness Passage, which I think at least some of you have read. Yeah, okay. I'm going to talk about it as though you might not have read it for the sake of those who haven't. Oh, who's there? Who's that little one? Oh, that's great. I'm about to become a grandfather. I'm very excited. Okay. Standard Loneliness Package. The lead story of Yu's second short story collection, Sorry, Please, Thank You, is one of his finest works. If you've read it, you will know that it concerns a horrible labor situation that in the world of the story is accepted as normal. The story's narrator works in a call center in Bangalore where, quote, I feel pain for money. other people's pain, physical, emotional, you name it. People contract for his time in half-hour segments, and their pain is shifted by an implanted chip to his nervous system and consciousness. For, quote, $12 per hour plus reimbursement for painkillers, unquote, he endures their broken legs and broken hearts, hernias, root canals, and migraines, incarcerations, unrequited loves, and bereavements. Periodically through the story, he quotes prices such as death of an aunt is $700, death of an uncle is $6, bad day in the market is $1,000, kids recital, I think this is hilarious, kids recital is $125 an hour, church is $150. Thus are the worker's body and mind commodified and monetized. In this world, as in ours, productivity experts have constructed the employee's time for full efficiency. Waiting time at the doctor's office, for instance, which might in the past have provided a brief respite, has been eliminated. You just get a little break in your day waiting to go in and have your teeth drilled, where you could maybe sit and read a magazine or something. They've cut all that out. Indeed, the narrator says, quote, they have gotten it down to a science, how much a human being can take in a given 12-hour shift. And the end result is you leave work every day right about at your exact breaking point. Though now it is more scientific than ever, this maximizing of exploitation has long been a regular feature of capitalism. One is reminded of the treatment of enslaved Africans on the cotton and sugar plantations of the Americas, of Marx's and others' 19th century accounts of Great Britain's, what Blake called dark satanic mills, of contemporary accounts of work in many factories in China and other places, and of work for corporations in the US such as United Parcel Service or Amazon, with their emphasis on low-cost efficiency in the delivery of consumer goods. Indeed, on the day I wrote this sentence, it was being widely reported that Amazon's drivers are sometimes too busy to stop for bathroom breaks and have to urinate in bottles in their trucks. Still, in the case of Yu's speaker, he has been successfully interpolated into his station. It's okay for me, he says. It's a good job. I didn't do that well in school after all. Maybe this is about where I belong in the grand scheme of things, in terms of high-end, low-end for me as a person. It is clear here as elsewhere in the story that insight, expectation, freedom, and privilege are hierarchized in terms of education. The narrator sees himself as below his friend Deepak, who did 3 semesters at technical college, on the basis of which Deepak believed that, quote, he deserved better, unquote. Deepak, in turn, tries to mimic the engineers who speak, quote, a different language, a language of knowing something, a language of being an expert at something, a language of being something more than an hourly unit, unquote. But as with most attempts at mimicry, Deepak's is a hollow pose based on a thwarted hope that a proper performance of the markers of status might be enough to break down the barriers of the structures of privilege. You know, you can pretend to be an engineer all you want, and you might con some of the people some of the time, but that doesn't make you an engineer. Right? So to return to the narrator's own position, if the job he has is the mean between the high end and the low end, he also seems to have a fairly clear idea of what the high and low end would be. The low end would be to sell his whole life rather than each workday. This is what his father did. He mortgaged his life for 40 years to provide for his family. Quote, and if he made it full term, which sadly he did not, he could stop. He could come back to us. That's called retirement. This low end is a reification of the way many men figuratively sell themselves to their jobs, and in doing so, abandon or lose their lives with their families. I knew a dentist in the US who hated being a dentist. And he made this great plan. He had some family money, and he made a lot of money as a dentist. So he continued to do it so that he could retire at 50, which that would be nice, you know. I mean, retirement, believe me, is wonderful. The guy had a heart attack and died when he was 49. Just the worst. And he spent every day of his life hating his job. The narrator's high end would be to buy a prepackaged existence made from, quote, the leftover slices of life, like the time in the doctor's waiting room that I mentioned earlier. What they do is they take these leftover slices and they smush them all together into a kind of reconstituted life slab, a life loaf. I don't know if spam is a meat that you get in India or not, but this is a meat that is smashed together from various meat byproducts in the US. This life is kind of like spam. But the narrator has his eye on one of these. Not a dream life, which is a registered trademark in his world. Not top of the line, but a good one. This is a life he could buy, right? Standard possibility, low volatility, a kind-hearted wife with nice hair, 0.35 kids, no actuals, but some potential kids, a solid 35% chance of having one. Normal life expectancy, average health, median aggregate amount of happiness. I test drove it once and it felt good. It felt right. It fit just fine. Nonetheless, he admits that, quote, I just thought there might be more to it all than this, unquote. More than this life of standardized experience and carefully limited dreams. This story's premise symbolizes the reality that the labor market is, for billions of workers, simply a place where they sell their capacity to endure misery. And the reality that what wealth buys, and the reality that what wealth buys is too often the suffering of others in one's own place. You know, there's nothing more valuable that you can buy than your own time. But you buy it by buying someone else's time to do what you would have been doing. I'm very fortunate to have a housekeeper, but that's an example. I mean, I pay this person well and try to be a decent person about it, but I'm using my money to buy her time to replace my time doing menial work. The narrators may not be, as he claims, a good job, but it is all too truly, and this is part of the point of the story, a job like many others. A job where you spend your time tolerating misery or boredom. Perhaps its saddest implication is that the narrator thinks that this is all he deserves. The story's plot is also structured by a romance, or at least a proto-romance, one that ends unhappily, specifically for reasons related to the working conditions of the narrator's colleague, girlfriend, Kirthi. Right? Is that how that would be pronounced? Kirthi?
Yeah, it is Kirti. Yep. Or Kirthi.
Kirti?
Okay. Kirti.
Kirti. She is at work, by her own description, a heartbreak specialist. She says, there are 247 ways to have your heart broken, and I have felt them all. In other words, people buy her time to feel the pain of heartbreak. Right? This being her experience day after day, she seems in her private life incapable of taking emotional risks. She cannot or will not open up to the narrator, so that before long, he tells us, things stopped progressing with Kirti. And then, quote, she has collapsed our shared space, meager as it was. At the very end of the story, she does briefly open up to him fully. The story is ending, but only by buying a unit of his time so that he can feel what she feels after she has left him. Interestingly, however, there is a way in which this opening is also a great cruelty. Much earlier in the story, the narrator has told us that heartbreak is of all types of tickets the worst. And the example he gives is one in which he has to feel the pain, not of the partner whose heart is broken, but of the one who is doing the breaking. The worst feelings he has imposed on him at work are the feelings of hurting someone else, breaking someone else's heart. And what she does is she buys his time so that he can feel how she feels when she breaks his heart. So when she opens herself to the narrator, she shows him why she can't love him, even though she'd like to. But she does so by making him experience the worst of pains. Thereby, we should also note, escaping from that pain herself, at least for half an hour. Right? His and the story's last words are his reaction to this pain. Okay, so. Okay, so. Okay. They may sound like an expression of empathy with her. Okay, I get it. And of resignation to the situation. Okay, that's the way it is. But we should also recall that they echo what was called the mantra that the narrator's friend Deepak muttered when, after an experience of another man's guilt at murdering his wife, Deepak was being carted away by the paramedics, his mind completely blown by having been, quote, inside the body of a monster. He's basically been driven mad by this experience, and he goes out just muttering, okay, so, okay, so. In the context of the work these people do and the psychic damage it does, Kirti's action of opening herself, traditionally an act of loving and giving, becomes not that, or more properly, not only that, but also and inseparably an act of extreme cruelty. Indeed, there is a sense in which, in this context, such cruelty, whose effect one hopes will cauterize the other person's desire, is itself a gift, perhaps the greatest or even the only gift one can give another. The only gift she can give him is to show him why she can't love him and he shouldn't try to love her. And that's caused by their work in the story. Okay, I'm going to turn now to the most recent novel. Yu's first three books have relatively little focus on Asian American identity or issues. Indeed, in a 2012 interview, he stated, "I have not identified myself as an Asian American writer. I am aware that others have so identified him." But Interior Chinatown presents a different case. Its title refers in part to the text's formal conceit that the protagonist lives in a world that is also a television show in which he is a bit player and for which the novel is a script. Interior Chinatown refers to a setting, an interior setting in the neighborhood of Chinatown, right? This is a marker in TV scripts or movie scripts. You might have exterior the desert, or you might have interior Chinatown to locate the scene. But the title also refers to having Chinatown, with all its historical, cultural, and stereotypical meanings, in or as one's own interior, one's own interiority, one's own self. The character has an interior Chinatown. A map of interior Chinatown might take the form of a Venn diagram, wherein a literal historical type of place intersects with an Orientalist site or TV set created for tourists or TV consumers for the playing out of stories in which the residents of the space are simply supporting characters or villains or background. So real Chinatown, TV Chinatown, the overlap is where this book takes place. I might mention also that it's important to note that real Chinatowns, particularly the one in San Francisco, were often created as actual legal ghettos. Chinese people could not live in any part of the city except Chinatown. And that was the case for many years in Chinatown in San Francisco. Well, in the Chinatown that is this Orientalist TV set, where the Chinese people are simply supporting characters, they are perpetually alien and peripheral, and they are never individual. The men are identified in the script only as versions of, quote, a character whose name is generic Asian man. Okay. They're not even generic Asian American, because the American in Asian American is always under erasure. This is one of the book's themes. It is so not only because they are in a perpetual state of arrival, but also because the true subjects of American history are perceived to be only black and white, which is also the name of a TV show about two detectives who are black and white, the show for which the book is a script. Much of the book is a script. The book claims that Asian Americans have internalized the notion that despite its long and outrageously painful history, the racial oppression of people of East Asian descent, quote, is second class, unquote, because it does not include the original American sin of slavery. So not only do the Asian American people suffer from racism, but they also suffer from thinking that their suffering is second class compared to the blacks, who are, along with the whites, the real protagonists of America. So throughout, the position of Asian Americans in the culture as a whole is figured by the position of Asian American actors in Hollywood. The protagonist's father, rather like other versions of men of his generation in Yu's work, totally devotes himself to his job, and he briefly ascends to the highest position available to someone like him, which is Kung Fu Man. Kung Fu Man is the only Asian American who can be a star, right? It's Jackie Chan, right? Though this is a position of stardom, it's also still an outside position, a stereotype, a version of, according to the text, Fu Manchu, yellow man, unquote. Kung Fu Man is still marked and limited by difference. Moreover, his ascent comes at the expense of his family. I'm quoting now, this is how she, the protagonist's mother, lost her husband, how you lost your dad, unquote. Later, the son, the protagonist of the book, repeats the father's success and his loss. On the one hand, the success is hollow. Quote, doing well is the trap because you're still in a show that doesn't have a role for you. you're still an Asian American stereotype. Right? On the other hand, it also comes at the personal cost, again, of separation from family. As in How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, however, the son manages to break the pattern to stop repeating the generic and false story of Asian American dream and failure. He chooses his family over the myth and decides to, quote, take what you can get. Try to build a life at the margins made from bit pieces. A life of identity as bricolage. The use of the TV show in Interior Chinatown particularly highlights the importance of the gaze and performance in the lives of Asian Americans. There is a cruel paradox in such lives. The dominant culture's measure of their success is the degree to which they remain unseen. Success for the Asian American is success at not being seen. If racial difference is signaled by one's appearance, to be a model minority is to model invisibility, to erase the difference by erasing the sight of yourself, as it were. Yet in mainstream life in general, and especially on television, success is linked not to invisibility, but to its opposite. The more attention one attracts, the higher one is rated. The desire to be seen is the desire to be at center stage rather than in the background, to stand out rather than blend in, to be a star, not an extra, to be an American, right? With our individualist narcissism. For Yu's protagonist, life and television are at once stages on which one seeks to appear and panopticons in which one constantly monitors and restricts oneself for fear of the regulatory gaze. Thus, as the heroic figure, older brother in the book, says in the climactic court scene where the protagonist is on trial for his own disappearance, interestingly enough, older brother says, Chinatown, and indeed being Chinese, is and always has been from the very beginning a construction, a performance of features, gestures, culture, and exoticism, an invention, a reinvention, a stylization, figuring out the show, finding our place in it, which was the background, as scenery, as non-speaking players, figuring out what you're allowed to say, end quote. Interior Chinatown is Yu's most fully realized book to date. Its framing of life as both a reality and a TV show is pulled off quite brilliantly, and as in his other fictions, the formal and metafictional pyrotechnics and the humor maintain a fine balance with the serious and moving human stories. One can only look forward eagerly to his future fictions. I want to close with some brief remarks on the problematics of unity and diversity in the US and its literature. There is a sense in which the Asian American writer is in a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Authors who write from the position of difference as Asian Americans run the risk of being compartmentalized as ethnic writers, racially categorized and shelved in the Asian American section of the bookstore, and thereby ignored by those outside their subject position, which is also most of the reading audience in the US. Authors who do not write from the expected subject position run the risk of being seen as trying to be white or as ignoring their roots. Subjects who are marked as different, even if proud of their identity, suffer racist impositions. Subjects who seek full assimilation cannot attain it and also face the charge of submitting to colonization and racial hierarchy. Moreover, in times such as the present, even the so-called model minority is not safe from racist violence. In my country these days, thanks largely to Donald Trump, old Asian American women are being beaten in the streets. in the current upsurge of COVID era China virus bigotry. Okay, and this is the last paragraph. I know that's a relief. This is a problem. It's a problem of identity and difference and in-betweenness for which at present there is no solution. It's also a fundamental American historical problem. But solution itself is a word that carries resonances of assimilation, of the dissolving of the different into the same homogeneous liquid, into a solution. Right? It is, of course, far beyond my ken to propose a way out of this central problem of my culture, but I do want to propose a better metaphor. Solution is too much like melting pot, suggesting the blending and assimilation that simply erase or falsely purport to erase difference. The fashionable alternative to melting pot these days in the US is the metaphor of the salad bowl. But part of the problem with this metaphor is that it implies that there are components of, it implies that the components of culture are to be consumed and digested by some eater who is larger than they are and who is to digest them and then evacuate what is indigestible. So a little problematic metaphor, I think. Returning to, but still rejecting the solution metaphor, I propose that a better metaphor might be suspension, specifically as in a colloidal suspension, in which individual and clustered molecules retain their undissolved identity within a liquid or other medium of suspension. Colloidal suspensions have three interesting properties that might serve the metaphor. First, the particles in a colloidal suspension don't just sit there waiting to be eaten as like the salad. They vibrate in a constant agitation caused by their bombardment by the liquid molecules. An agitation, interestingly enough, known as Brownian motion. And it's named for the scientist whose name was Brown, who discovered it. But there's something very interesting about the agitation of minorities in the US as they're bombarded by the dominant being named for the color brown. You know, it's interesting coincidence of language. Second, colloidal dispensions diffuse light. Light hits it and the light is diffused. A metaphor for something that one hopes could result from the maintenance of difference within proximity. Wouldn't it be nice if difference could be maintained within the solution and could thereby diffuse light, spread light? Light, of course, connected with truth or knowledge. Finally, at the origin, at the beginning of the time life of life itself, it was in a colloidal suspension that life was actually formed. Wouldn't it be nice to think of a culture that in its suspension is life forming? I thank you for the gift of your attention. I'm sorry I went on longer than expected.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Byers. Participants will notice that the talk began with Professor Byers talking about himself as an individual reader, and then took us to teacher's responsibility and how one should read diversely, and primarily a teacher is a slightly better reader and a constant reader, I suppose. The number of books in the background Professor Byers, where Professor Byers is sitting, is testimony enough. And then
I haven't read nearly all of them, just so you know.
And then moving into then encompassing, covering all the works of Charles Yu. And as a result, we have a very, very comprehensive idea of this writer, at least. Professor Byers was asking me how much would an average Indian literature criticism student know about American literature, and I said we are still very, very Anglo-centric, and therefore in bits and pieces, yes, we know about American literature. American literature is an elective paper in many postgraduate English departments all over India, but we are still very much centered chronologically from Chaucer to the postmodern of British literature. And that is also how national eligibility tests are conducted if you want to become a tenured teacher, which, by the way, you touch upon, and that is becoming also equally rare in India. Not to mention that that education is increasingly becoming corporatized all over, and also in India, something that you also touch upon. So in all, you will find, dear participants, that this is a range of things that he has brought about, when apparently he said that he would just talk about Charles Yu, and maybe many of us felt that through one story. So this is the diversity that he has covered. I'm sure all of us we have enjoyed very much your talk. As people are gathering some of their observations, if I may begin with Professor Byers, as part of what I wanted to ask has already been answered towards the end of your talk. That is, race in America has been, till very recently, I suppose, the binary of the white and the black. So with writers like Jhumpa Lahiri, with writers like Amy Tan, writers like Charles Yu, is there a gradual emergence of the third race, the brown, in America?
Well, I think two things are happening, and that is one, and the other is also a much greater consciousness of Latinx literature. In some ways, literary study is ahead of the culture, I think, because literary study is more aware of the Asian American presence than I would say white people in general are, and the Asian American history. That said, there is still this problem of minoritizing literature, and how do you both recognize a subject position and also not compartmentalize it, you know. Right now, it's a very interesting time because there is this growing awareness of racism against Asian Americans because it's happening on the street, in a way that it wasn't until Donald Trump and his minions tried to make Chinese people a scapegoat, or people of Chinese origin. The sad thing, the whole thing is enormously sad, but an even sadder part of it is the non-distinction among people of different national origins. It's not only Chinese women who are getting attacked on the street, but Korean women, or other women who look like they might be to someone like they might be Chinese. Right?
Or repeatedly, as the latest Indianapolis FedEx shooting showed, that the Indian Sikhs are always confused with Talibans, Muslims, and they are shot at. So that also keeps happening. So many examples.
Yes, it is a misinterpretation of the headgear,
the turban.
My country's one thing that, there's a tremendous split in the country, as you know. But one thing that is increasingly visible to people in the universities, for instance, is the degree to which the histories of discrimination against Asian peoples, whether East Asian or South Asian, has been erased. Mm-hmm. And the need to bring that back. You mentioned Brian Leung earlier, and Brian's novel, Carry Me Home, is an example of a recovery of a piece of that racist history, a massacre of Chinese miners in a Western small town. We are split right now between people who are more and more openly white supremacist and people who are trying not to be. But I do think that in this moment there's a little more awareness of the difficulties and the histories of Asian Americans. How long that will last, who knows? Is it going to be a couple of news cycles, or is it going to be a real change? I certainly hope for the latter. And that's one of the things that literature can do. This is a hobby horse of mine, but most of us have our ideas of the past from fictional texts, literature, television, movies. We know something about what the past looked like from photographs, but most of us look more at movies and TV to see how it looked. And the stories that are told matter if people are going to get their ideas of the past from stories. And part of our work can be to make sure that the stories that are told are more both truer and more complex than the stereotypical stories that have always dominated.
In this context, I really like your the colloidal suspension thing. That was really something very, very different. One would have, one has come across the melting pot, the salad bowl. I don't know whether you are aware about Indian cuisine. In India, you have a plate, a large plate, and there are small bowls of everything. So it is called the plate in India is called the thali, the plate, and then there are all these bowls, and then that is another metaphor being said that how the small is as important as the thing that is ultimately, because the bowls are inside the plate. So the plate has to accommodate the bowl, many bowls. Then and the plate also has the main rice dish or the main wheat dish with it, and then the bowls contain all the vegetables or the sides that go along with it,
and that give flavor.
And yes, but this colloidal suspension is really very good. It's amazing. Coming back to the story, there are a few things, Charles, you seems to be preoccupied with. For example, his preoccupation with time.
Yes.
And the father leaving.
Yes.
That is, I mean, I have just read a little bit of Interior Chinatown and this story that you sent, and from your talk, it strikes me that the father figure, the father leaving, is something that is there in his stories, and of course his preoccupation with time. That's
yes. Now we can't read the biographical details too specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure, but I don't think Yu's own father ever disappeared. I know that he is very much still in touch with his father.
Right.
But it may have to do with this notion that the father is absent through work, even while present. In any case, it has been a kind of persistent motif.
Right.
And something that I want to see him do, I mean, you know, who do I get to say what he does? But something that I would like to see him do is to write more about relations, lateral relations within his own generation, which he hasn't written as much about. He does keep retelling this story of the parents. And, you know, I think that's personal. I think in some sense it's also cultural. Almost every Asian American book that I can think of is partly about the relation to the parents, partly because it is through that it's a relation to history, right? And to the relation to immigration.
Yeah.
You
Something
think
that Jhumpa
one
Lahiri
more
writes about.
Pardon?
Something that Jhumpa Lahiri writes about.
Yes.
You remember we read Jhumpa Lahiri in our summer program.
Yes. Interpreter of Maladies, which is a book I continue to love. Yes. But also Woman Warrior.
Woman
Warrior. Also Amy Tan, all these things that where a lot of the concern is about generational, working out the relations of generations.
I would request, if participants have some things to respond, please unmute yourself and interact.
Yes,
with
if you
Dr.
have any
Byers.
questions.
Yes, please. That would be really nice. Maria, something to observe?
Thank you for your interesting talk, Tom. It was great to listen to you after so many years. And it was great because I was reminded of those very words that you said to us during the seminar, that some of the ideas still resonated within me, stayed with me, certainly. Your approach to literature, the way how you see literature connected with real life, the way that literature is relevant, and also the role of a teacher. We as teachers in the academia, the life is very difficult. I'm struggling myself with certain duties, how to combine family and academic life. It's not easy, but there is that inner motivation to spread love for literature and to show that it matters in life and it can make our life easier in a way.
Yes.
I don't know what to ask. What about your reading of poetry? Do you have something that you would recommend, some recent book that got your attention?
I'm going to have to take 15 seconds to plug in my computer. My battery is low. Just a second.
In the meantime, let me inform the participants that Maria was another fellow from Slovakia. I met in 2011, and we had a great time with Professor Thomas Byers and other resource persons we met, and we went around many places in America. And
this way you can also see, excuse me, Sanjay, just for one second. This way you can also see that I am actually wearing pants. Always a question in these meetings, right? Anyway, so yes, you were saying you met all these people and...
Yeah. I was just informing others about Maria, and we are going to have Maria's talk also. Maria, I have written a mail to you, and we would be having your talk, and similarly it would be announced, and all of us would be very eager to listen to you and to your colleague.
Please let me know when that's happening.
Yes, sure. Yes, Maria was asking you about poetry.
Yeah, poetry stuff. Is there anything that you would recommend from recent books that you read, or you are more into fiction?
I haven't been reading much poetry lately, but I do have a couple of recommendations. One is, you've probably read Claudia Rankine. I think the particular book I'm thinking of is called Citizen. And it's a moving, important book. I also want to give a shout out to my former colleague at Louisville, Kiki Petrosino,
yes,
who has one of the world's great names, first of all, but also Kiki's last couple of books have done really well, and her God, I'd have to go to the shelf to look at titles. I haven't seen the most recent one, but it's a very interesting project. Kiki has moved to the University of Virginia, and her roots are in Virginia. And she has been tracing the history, particularly the history of the Black side of her heritage, and has written a book, it just won a prize, in fact, about that subject. She is a poet in ascent, at the moment. And
which reminds me, Maria might also remember, how is Harriet Mullen doing?
I haven't heard from Harriet, for quite a while, but I think she's doing fine, and I think she published a selected poems, if I'm not mistaken. As it happens, Harriet Mullen is a very important Black experimental poet in the U.S. who also met with our groups, our summer seminars. But after one of the summer seminars, Harriet, who is a bit of an artist, made me a painting, and I happened to have it right behind me.
Oh my!
And that's Harriet's painting. And she said she gave me the one with an apple on its head because it's an apple for the teacher. So, but I think she's doing well.
Right.
I'm sorry I'm not up on poetry as much as I would like to be. I do think that the young woman who read at the inauguration was awfully good. And I can't think of her name right now because I'm 71 years old. But I think she's a terrific poet and a poet to be reckoned with.
Yeah,
I don't have much to give you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Yeah, it can be a comment, an observation. It need not be a question, though.
If I may add.
Yeah, please, Hinal.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Your lecture was very, very captivating. I don't usually, listen to the lectures, but yours was the one which Sanjay sir made us, a little bit that read the stories and everything. And like that, I joined your lecture and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And you sort of, I am not a reader. I'm more of, as you said, a TV watcher, a series, movies watcher. But you encouraged me to read more books, and as you said, diverse books. So that was something very nice. And thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for your lecture. Like, it was very nice.
Thank you for those very generous remarks. You might really enjoy Interior Chinatown since it's partly in the form of a TV script.
I may definitely try that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hinal
There
is a
was a hand
semester
up.
2 student with us in the department.
There was a hand that was raised.
Yeah, was it? Bhavdeep, was that you raising a hand at the beginning?
It happened, sir. It happened by mistake, but I wanted to ask a question related to the title of your talk, sir. As it says, first class super writer. Now, how would you put this writer as a first class super writer? Not only a writer, but super writer. So that was a little bit fascinating as well. I would like to.
Well, I think it's hyperbole at this point. I think we'll see what you does in the future. But I really like his work, and he has been very little written about, so I wanted to be positive about it. But mostly it's a play on the title of his first book, Third Class Superhero. So it was a joke on that title. It was the best I could do. Sanjay needed a title, and
there's quite a bit of intertextuality, Professor Byers, in this story at least, and maybe in Charles Yu. As such, for example, there's 247 ways to have your heart broken. Would take us to Wallace Stevens' 13 ways of looking at a blackbird, or Simon and Garfunkel 50 ways to leave your lover.
Yeah.
So that's
yes, especially that last one, I think.
Yeah. Simon and Garfunkel 50 ways to leave your lover. So
yes,
quite a bit of intertextuality there.
You know, you also mentioned the Stevens poem, The 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. One of the really important Black critics in the U.S. Wrote either a book or an article called 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Man.
Okay.
Which I thought was a wonderful play on yeah.
Oh.
There was another hand I saw.
Yes, I think Vishwaraj has an observation to make. Vishwaraj, please.
Yes, sir. I have a question. It might be a bit weird, but it's pricking me since I read the story. Since Charles Yu has been very precise with the detailing and numbers and everything in the story, I have seen a bit of a wasteland as well. So I wanted to ask that in each ticket we have a prize of different agony, like death of some near one and everything. So have we decided the prize? Was it random numbers, or I mean, we can't really measure the sentimental value of a relation or anything. So are there random numbers, or he has put any thinking behind those?
I think there is some thinking behind it, and some of it is comic. That is to say that when, for instance, he includes a price for attending a child's musical recital, I mean, it's a low price because that is not tip-top suffering, but the fact that he gives a price for that is itself humor. And I think that if you look at those prices, you get a sense of what youth sees as a kind of hierarchy of pain. Death of a cousin is $500. Death of a sibling is $1,250. More than twice the price of death of a cousin. Parents are $2,000 apiece. And what those numbers do, and it's in one way it's a very disturbing thing, is that they try to put a price, and thereby they try to hierarchize suffering. And if you imagine that being done not by you himself, but by the fictional corporation for whom he works, then I think that there's a really telling point about the monetization of everything. Your own notion that you can't really put a price on these things, I think is very much on his mind as he puts prices on them in the name of the corporation. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
I thought his setting of Bangalore, Hyderabad, Delhi, quite a bit of seems to have done some research at least of such outsourcing firms in India.
Yes.
And he writes from an insider's point of view. I mean, and then very deftly putting using Indian names, and then talking about that little girl having rice and peas when she is looking on the television. And I think those small details, they're very, very nicely done in the story.
I'm glad you think so. I have wondered myself, and I wanted to ask you and to ask this audience how you felt about the voice, because I find the narrator's voice in some ways rather American, but does it work also for the voice of someone who might be working in a call center in India?
I think so, yes. I would like to ask the opinion of other readers who have read it. I felt this could as well be somebody writing with an intimate knowledge of these outsourcing companies in India.
I think that the voice is more about employment status than about region.
Correct.
That to a certain extent, people across the world might sound a little like this. But that's a speculation.
That's true.
Any other comments on that question?
From Vishwaraj, I mean, throughout the story, there is a constant juxtaposition of people and their status, pain, suffering with numbers. That is also, one can see that. So that is, as you mentioned, that the hierarchy of it. For example, I mean, I think the highest price is on the death of one's children. I think that is. Yeah.
Yeah, they won't even quote a price on that without talking to you first. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like art galleries where if they're selling relatively cheap works, they put them on the work or on a price list. And if they're selling really expensive works, you have to ask.
Right.
I also wanted, since we were talking about this isn't a numerical thing, but there's a list of his day one day that I think is really funny. And I sort of wanted to use it in the paper, but it didn't end up there. So I'm just going to, if I can find it real quickly, yes. So this is this is one of his work days. I am at a funeral. I am having a hernia. I am having a hernia at a funeral. I am in prison. I'm at the dentist. I'm at the prison dentist with a hernia. I am in love. I am in withdrawal. I am in love with someone who doesn't love me back. I wish I had a hernia. I loved that passage.
Great, great. Is there a comment on the chat box? Let me just see. Dhwani Vaishnav likes your talk very much for being very engaging, and okay, this is just an observation. And well, I have spoken about you to my students, and she is now a former student, now a teacher in a college. This lady Dhwani Vaishnav, about 200 kilometers away from where we are. She teaches in a engineering college there, and yeah, she was a student when I was there for the summer program, and I came back and I spoke a lot about you and the other resource persons, and so she finally gets to see you.
That was a lovely year, that 2011 group.
Yeah. Oh, I did send out invitation. I mean information basically to quite a few people, and some of them did say they would try to make it. I'm still in touch with about half a dozen of them, so that's quite an achievement. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly you won't be able to have a nap today, Professor Byers, because we have robbed you of your nap time, and it was really a wonderful session here, and I thank all participants who have joined and who have stayed along. Besides this, there is the Facebook Live that people are listening to, and we have a recording of this, and we will be sharing this recording with you. I'll be sending it over by email to you. And now that we have finally established contact, periodically taking proper appointments and permission, we would like to have you now and then.
I'd be delighted. I really enjoy doing this kind of thing. It's a great pleasure for me, and I very much appreciate your attentiveness to a rather long talk today. As for my nap, I often nap late. Don't worry, I'm going to take a nap.
All right. Good. With those words, I thank everyone. Thank you very much. And
thank you all very much.
Hope to connect again. Thank you, Professor Byers,
Yes.
and thank you, Maria, and all others. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Maria. Thank you, Sanjay, very much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
And I'm glad I did it this time.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.